First, despite the fact that we are now allied with such Middle Eastern governments as Syria, a terrorist dictatorship, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, feudalistic dictatorships, and Egypt, a one-party state which receives $7 billion in debt forgiveness to wage this war with us, I believe that in the long run, the action unleashed last night will go strongly against our interests in the Middle East. Clearly, the United States and its allies will win this war, but the death and destruction caused will not, in my opinion, soon be forgotten by the Third World in general and by the poor people of the Middle East in particular. I fear very much that what we said yesterday is that war and the enormous destructive power of our armed forces is our preferred manner for dealing with the very complicated and terrible crises in the Middle East. I fear that someday we will regret that decision and that we are in fact laying the groundwork for more and more wars in that region in years to come. I am not at all sure that the people of our country, especially the working people, the poor people, and the elderly, will win. The 2 million homeless people in our country sleeping out on the sidewalks and under the bridges are not going to win this war. There will be no money available to house them. The tens of millions of Americans who cannot afford health care today are not going to win this war. There will be no money available for their needs. The family farmers in Vermont who are today being driven off of their land are not going to win this war, nor will the children or the elderly, who in all probability will see cutbacks in their Social Security and their Medicare checks in order to fund it.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from New Jersey for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I don't think any member of this body disagrees that Saddam Hussein is a tyrant, a murderer, and a man who has started 2 wars. He is clearly someone who cannot be trusted or believed. The question, Mr. Speaker, is not whether we like Saddam Hussein or not. The question is whether he represents an imminent threat to the American people and whether a unilateral American invasion of Iraq will do more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, the front page of the Washington Post today reported that all relevant U.S. intelligence agencies now say, despite what we have heard from the White House, that, quote, Saddam Hussein is unlikely to initiate a chemical or biological attack against the United States, end quote. Even more importantly, our intelligence agencies say that should Saddam conclude that a U.S.-led attack could no longer be deterred, he might, at that point, launch a chemical or biological counterattack. In other words, there is more danger of an attack on the United States if we launch a precipitous invasion. Mr. Speaker, I do not know why the President feels, despite what our intelligence agencies are saying, that it is so important to pass a resolution of this magnitude this week, and why it is necessary to go forward without the support of the United Nations and our major allies, including those who are fighting side by side with us in the war on terrorism. But I do fear that as a part of this process, the President is ignoring some of the most pressing economic issues affecting the well-being of ordinary Americans. There has been virtually no public discussion about the stock market's loss of trillions of dollars over the last few years, and that millions of Americans have seen the retirement benefits for which they have worked their entire lives disappear. When are we going to address that issue? This country today has a $340 billion trade deficit, and we have lost 10% of our manufacturing jobs in the last 4 years, 2 million decent-paying jobs. The average American worker today is working longer hours for lower wages than 25 years ago. When are we going to address that issue? Mr. Speaker, poverty in this country is increasing, and median family income is declining. Throughout this country, family farmers are being driven off of the land, and veterans, the people who have put their lives on the line to defend us, are unable to get the health care and other benefits they were promised because of government underfunding. When are we going to tackle these issues and many other important issues that are of such deep concern to Americans? Mr. Speaker, in the brief time I have, let me give you 5 reasons why I'm opposed to giving the President a blank check to launch a unilateral invasion and occupation of Iraq, and why I will vote against this resolution. 1, I have not heard any estimates of how many young American men and women might die in such a war, or how many tens of thousands of women and children in Iraq might also be killed. As a caring nation, we should do everything we can to prevent the horrible suffering that a war will cause. War must be the last recourse in international relations, not the first. Second, I am deeply concerned about the precedent that a unilateral invasion of Iraq could establish in terms of international law and the role of the United Nations. If President Bush believes that the U.S. can go to war at any time against any nation, what moral or legal obligation could our government raise if another country chose to do the same thing? Third, the United States is now involved in a very difficult war against international terrorism, as we learned tragically on September 11th. We are opposed by Osama bin Laden and religious fanatics who are prepared to engage in a kind of warfare that we have never experienced before. I agree with Brent Scowcroft, Republican former National Security Advisor for President George Bush Sr., who stated, and I quote, "An attack on Iraq at this time would seriously jeopardize, if not destroy, the global counterterrorist campaign we have undertaken," end quote. Fourth, at a time when this country has a $6 trillion national debt and a growing deficit, we should be clear that a war and a long-term American occupation of Iraq could be extremely expensive. Fifth, I am concerned about the problems of so-called unintended consequences. Who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed? And what role will the U.S. play in an ensuing civil war that could develop in that country? Will moderate governments in the region who have large Islamic fundamentalist populations be overthrown and replaced by extremists? Will the bloody conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority be exacerbated? And these are just a few of the questions that remain unanswered. If a unilateral American invasion of Iraq is not the best approach, what should we do? In my view, the U.S. must work with the United Nations to make certain, within clearly defined timelines, that the UN inspectors are allowed to do their jobs. These inspectors should undertake an unfettered search for Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and destroy them when found, pursuant to past UN resolutions. If Iraq resists inspection and elimination of stockpiled weapons, we should stand ready to assist the UN in enforcing compliance. I thank the
Bernie Sanders. He's an independent from chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Good to have you on. As always, I want to talk to you about what this situation could mean, Senator, for your own political aspirations. But let's start with the specifics, Senator. We are at war, the country, the United States. In this area, there has been no debate, no vote, or declaration of war. Do you believe that was a mistake?
Well, I believe that we need serious discussion in Congress, Chris, but I will tell you something else. I voted against that resolution a couple of weeks ago because I do not want to see the United States get involved in another quagmire in the Middle East. I'm sitting here wondering where Saudi Arabia is, where Kuwait is, where Qatar is. Saudi Arabia spends more money on defense than they're the fourth largest defense spender in the entire world, more than the United Kingdom, more than France. I want to see them get their hands dirty. I want to see them starting to use their Air Force in a significant way. I think we should be supportive. But this war will not be won by the United States alone. It'll be won by people in the neighborhood, by Saudi Arabia, by Iran, and those countries prepared to take on ISIS.
Well, why do you think they're so slow to action? Why do you think we saw a video on Friday of ISIS advancing and Turkish military just watching well within shooting range?
Well, you know why? Because I think they have full confidence that the people of the United States are going to do the dirty work for them. And I'll be damned if kids in the state of Vermont or taxpayers in the state of Vermont have to defend the royal Saudi family, which is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and which, as I said a moment ago, has a major and significant Air Force and Army. We should be supportive. But this is going to have to be a war won by the Muslim countries themselves, taking on this dangerous and horrendous organization. It cannot be won, and it will not be won, by the United States alone.
Does it mean that the United States and its allies have overstated how much appetite there is in the Arab world to take on ISIS, how much appetite there is to fight for the soul of Islam?
Well, the soul of Islam is what we're talking about. And I think the President and Secretary Kerry have done a good job trying to bring together these forces in the Middle East. But they're sitting around saying, hey, The American taxpayer will do it for us. The American soldier will do it for us. Not only is that wrong, in the long run, it's not going to win. But I'll tell you the other thing that concerns me. While we focus all of our attention on ISIS, the middle class of this country continues to collapse. We have more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth. Real unemployment is close to 12%. And you know what the people tell me in Vermont and around the country? Let's also start paying attention to the crises facing working families in America.
Well, it's interesting. You know, the recent CNN ORC poll, Senator, echoes what you're saying now that should be obvious to anybody watching the show, which is the economy wins over the ISIS concern about 65-35 in terms of what their concern is when they go to vote. However, everybody cares about this situation, and it's ironic that not only is Congress not coming up with plans on how to help the economy, but they're also not coming up with a plan for declaring war, and constitutionally you're supposed to. Now you got Pelosi asking Boehner to have a vote on it. Do you think a vote happens?
Well, you'll have to ask Mr. Boehner about that. I don't know. But I'll tell you what I do want to vote on. I want to vote on raising the minimum wage. I want to vote on a massive jobs program, because real unemployment is 12%. Let's put millions of people back to work rebuilding our infrastructure. Here's my concern, Chris. The question is whether the media and whether the Congress can chew gum and walk at the same time, and whether we're going to continue to ignore the fact that the middle class of this country is in desperate shape. 95% of all new income goes to the top 1%, massive wealth inequality. We've got to focus on those issues.
Well, you know what my answer is going to be, Senator. You guys do something about it, and we'll cover it. You know, listen to Speaker Boehner, though, on what your big concern is about not wanting kids from Vermont to wind up having to fight this war. Boehner's singing a different tune. Listen to what the Speaker had to say.
And if no one else will step up, you would recommend putting American boots on the ground?
We have no choice. These are barbarians. They intend to kill us. And if we don't destroy them first, we're going to pay the price.
George Stephanopoulos asking the obvious question. You now have the Speaker of the House giving an answer that, yes, he would have to commit U.S. troops. You guys won't even debate the issue, and he's already making a decision?
Well, don't be you guys. You know, Chris, it's not you guys. You know, some of us are prepared to debate this issue. What Boehner is saying, basically, people should hear it carefully, is perpetual warfare in the Middle East, billions and billions of dollars of American taxpayer money, the loss of lives, while the royal kingdom of Saudi Arabia laughs all the way to the bank with their oil money. So this senator does not agree with that. And maybe Mr. Boehner also, before he talks about sending American kids into the Middle East, might want to raise the minimum wage, might want to deal with pay equity, might want to ask his billionaire friends to start paying their fair share of taxes.
Bernie Sanders, if you care so much about the American people and you want change, why don't you run for president? Are you afraid to take on Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't think it's a question of fear. As you know, I have said that I'm giving thought to doing that. But if I do something, I like to do it well. I'm going around the country getting an assessment from the American people as to whether or not there would be support for a campaign that, in fact, takes on the Koch brothers, takes on the billionaire class. I haven't made that decision yet, Chris.
You think Hillary can be beaten?
Well, first of all, I think that America is not into anointing anybody. I have a lot of respect for Hillary Clinton. She's a friend of mine. But I think in this country, we need a vigorous debate about why the people on top are doing so very well while everybody else has seen a decline in their standard of living. We need a debate about why we are the only major country on earth without a national health care program guaranteeing health care to all people. So there's a lot to discuss, and I think the American people look forward to that type of debate.
You're raising the right issues. I look forward to covering that kind of debate, and we'll see if you decide to actually get in there and throw some punches. Senator Sanders, thank you very much for joining us. Always good to have you on New Day.
Thank you, Chris.